It's like how I researched the Varginha case a lot. An American reached out to me and said, look, Edison Boaventura, the other day I was on a channel there. I like this. The Varginha subject, the Varginha case in Minas Gerais from 96 was really in the spotlight here because of a documentary that an American made here recently. Then it brought the whole thing back up. He said, like, there was this guy who told me that there's a letter from former President Clinton wanting to mention it, right? To mislead. He wanted information about what happened. This letter, just so you have an idea, is dated January 30th, 1996. The Varginha case started like this. The main events were on January 20, 1996. We know that on the 25th or 26th, a plane left Brazil. It was a large United States Air Force plane, a C-17, carrying the craft and the creatures that were captured in southern Minas, and it supposedly ended up at Area 51. And then there's this letter that's in the official documentation of the president, a letter that Bill Clinton wrote. And then from January 30th, 1996, he asked them to notify the president, citing a presidential law. So what were they bringing from America, and then for what? And then Groom Lake, also known as Area 51. In other words, a plane came from here, from America, from Brazil, and given the time, it can only be the Varginha case. So that guy there, that American, ended up passing it on to us, gave us the address of the government website. I went in, printed the letter, and read it. And then it's curious that the president didn't have access to the information, and they didn't tell him what was inside the United States Air Force plane. And here in Brazil, at that time, on January 20th, there was a former air traffic controller named Marcos Ferrez. He was working. Suddenly, he looks at the radar scope and sees an aircraft, the C-17 from the United States Air Force. The United States Air Force, it's gigantic. It's a war troop carrier. It can hold 77 tons inside, just so you have an idea. It can fit the craft, the beings, and something else. And then it entered Brazilian airspace, that American plane. Ferrez went there, and it didn't have authorization. For a military aircraft to enter national territory, it needs the AVO-EN, which is a flight authorization, and it didn't have it. Then he got scared and said, man, they're invading Brazil, right? There's going to be a war. He said he'd call his boss to report the situation. Before he could call, the boss came into the operation, something he never did. He said, hey, Ferrez, there's a plane coming in without authorization. We'll handle it later, don't worry. But let me inform you right now. They're going to land there in Viracopos, Campinas, and from there are 2 Brazilian Air Force helicopters that will take the Americans to Varginha. That was on January 20th, 1996. And today, this year, 2023, I found out some other information that a National Aeronautics and Space Administration aircraft landed at Congonhas Airport in Sao Paulo. Some commercial pilots who were coming from Europe and landing early in the morning were surprised to see a National Aeronautics and Space Administration plane parked there. But they didn't understand or ask questions. They just thought it looked nice, right? And later, as news reports about the Varginha case came out, then it clicked what was actually happening. Because we know today that National Aeronautics and Space Administration and also the United States Air Force were involved in the Varginha operation in the capture of the creatures, later in taking this from Brazil to the United States. In the Brazilian Air Force generated Area 51.
Many people saw the extraterrestrials or just the craft.
They saw more creatures and also saw the crafts, but there isn't any case. As far as I know, there's no case where the craft and being were seen together. Or do you have testimonies from people who saw the objects, whether they were luminous at night or properly shaped objects? So that cigar-shaped one, right? Learn, looking like a minibus. Some people saw objects, some people saw 2 circular objects connected by some kind of wire or rod like a dumbbell. Some people also saw crosses, objects in the shape of a cross, but the most common one was the rounded shape.
And some people saw beings.
And there were people who saw the creature. Now, the cool thing about the creatures is that all the reports are consistent in their characteristics. Usually it was a creature about 5'5" tall. It's what you marry, a concept. Hold on, meativizing. Thanks, Colette, basing Ruberti. The skin was oily, shiny. Some people say 3 fingers, those who could observe better, and 2 toes, although some say there were 2 fingers, like 2 cigars like this, big, fat, and there was another part at the back, like a chicken's foot. So some people say 3 fingers, but what was most evident were the 2 big toes, which even left a mark on the ground from those footprints. Another detail was the bulging eyes, red and sticking out like a frog's eyes. The nose was just a little thing, the mouth was just a slit, and there was no visible ear. And they also said that there were kind of 3 bumps on the head, like little lumps. A lot of people saw it in this case.
Varginha, a lot of people saw it.
Many people we talked to had sightings of these same creatures. Whether they were walking in Jardim Mandere, near Tres Corações, along the Rio Verde, which borders Tres Corações and Varginha. And also doctors who treated or came face to face with these creatures in the hospitals. At Humanitas, at the regional, and also later at Unicamp, which is in Campinas, because 2 creatures were taken there to Badam Palhares with Radim Metz to be analyzed, 1 alive and 1 dead. So an autopsy was performed on the dead one, and experiments were also conducted with the living creature.
And then, for example, you have access to these accounts because of interviews and things like that. But this is kind of hidden. It's not official information.
So officially, everyone denies it. The army denies it, the military police deny it, the Air Force denies it, everyone denies it. The doctors at the time denied it. Some doctors have already reconsidered and are discussing it. There are testimonies from doctors who saw the video of the creature, who recorded it there at the hospital. So even though there is a cover-up, today, 27 years after the case, we can see that things are starting to open up. But it's happening slowly, right? Because there's no interest from the Americans or from the Army intelligence agencies for this to come to light. But it could be that at any moment one of these videos leaks, whether it's from a military or civilian source, right? Because some doctors ended up filming this.
This is the most famous Brazilian case.
It ended up becoming more famous because of the international repercussion, right? They came here to Brazil at the time of the Varginha case. Even Japanese ufologists, just so you have an idea, right? French, Japanese, English, right? From various parts of Latin America, Italians too. I have several publications that ended up publicizing the Varginha case. Let me see if I have anything from here. For example, it's a comic book that was made in France about the Varginha case. This one's from the United States. Wow, the world
talks about this case. So
this is in England, right? This is a magazine called Unidentified Flying Object Magazine by a researcher named Graham Beardsall. He also went to Brazil to research the Varginha case. This is a book that was written by Dr. Roger Carlaire. He came to Brazil and had the opportunity to talk to the doctors who treated the creature. Everything, right? And he published this book, but there are also Japanese books, right? There's a lot magazines from various parts of the world that reported on this besides those Brazilian magazines, right? For example, it was published in Isto e Aki Aki in this magazine, and then in Manchete and in several Brazilian magazines. They also published about the Varginha case. He became internationally known for the military involvement, the cover-up. And today we also have about 150 witnesses who participated directly and indirectly in the case, including both civilian and military witnesses. The military usually avoids appearing because they signed some agreement to keep the matter confidential, since the subject was classified as top secret at that time, and it still is. Because when the 25 years were up, which is the period for top secret, the army quickly requested reclassification for another 25 years. In other words, we will only have access to this 50 years from now, counting from 1996, 50 years ahead. In other words, 2046,